Hey there, sleepyheads, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, as the world outside quiets, and the gentle hum of your fan, or perhaps just the silence of the night, fills the air, we're going to drift back to a truly unforgiving time and place, the bitter winter of December 1944. This was when the Ardennes Forest became the stage for a brutal German offensive known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. Forget the maps and the High Command's grand strategies for a moment. We're going to sink into the immediate tangible reality of a German soldier, experiencing the sheer bone-deep struggle for survival against an enemy, yes, but even more so against the relentless grip of winter and a military machine stretched past its breaking point. Allow your mind to softly settle as we journey back not to the strategists' war room, but to the cold hard ground where every breath was a fight. The Ardennes, December 1944. You've heard the name, perhaps read it in a book or seen it flash across a documentary screen. But what does it truly mean to be there? It means you are thrust into an unforgiving landscape where the trees are skeletal fingers scraping a bruised purple sky, and the ground itself is a cruel, deceptive blanket of snow, ice and fog. This isn't just winter. It's a living, breathing adversary. The air tastes metallic sharp with the cold and clings to your throat, turning every inhale into a small, painful gasp. Your uniform, already inadequate, seems to absorb the dampness, rather than repel it, a constant clammy reminder of your vulnerability. You understand, perhaps more deeply than any officer in a warm bunker ever could, that the grand strategies of high command, those audacious arrows drawn on crisp paper maps, dissolve into something far more personal here. They become the immediate tangible challenges of trying to keep your fingers from freezing solid as you load a rifle, of stifling the gnawing hunger in your gut, and of the sheer exhausting physical effort of simply lifting your foot through a new drift of snow. This isn't a war of grand overarching military objectives, at least not from your vantage point. Those vast aims frequently shrink down to the intimate pressing concerns of cold hunger and the primal need for warmth. You find yourself focusing on the small, almost absurd details, the way your breath fogs and immediately crystallizes on the dirty wool of your scarf, or how the cold metal of your rifle sticks to your gloved hand, resisting movement, almost rebelling against its purpose. Every day, every hour, sometimes every minute becomes an intense moment-to-moment confrontation with a reality so immediate, so visceral, that it dictates every breath you take and every action you perform. You learn to interpret the subtle groan of a pine branch under too much snow to recognize the thin, reedy whistle of an incoming shell before the crack of impact to gauge the depth of a snowdrift. Not with a map, but with the sinking weight of your own tired legs. Against this backdrop of systemic pressure from a desperate military and the relentless hostility of the environment, your daily existence has been distilled to its barest, most brutal essence. And as the day fades into another frigid night, you know this is merely the beginning of your personal encounter with the Bulge. With the omnipresent cold a constant companion, your immediate concern shifts from the broad strategic picture to the intensely personal tactile challenge of rudimentary shelter. You often find yourself in hastily dug foxholes, shallow depressions scooped from the frozen earth, reinforced with what meagre pine boughs you can tear from the surrounding trees, and perhaps a dwindling sliver of hope. These aren't fortifications. They're barely more than shallow graves offering minimal protection against the relentless cutting wind, and should it come the sudden fury of enemy fire. You remember one such foxhole barely deeper than your knees, half filled with a greasy melted slush where the snow had given way. The mud, a dark, viscous cold, would inevitably squeeze its way into your worn gloves, seeping through the fabric, highlighting the constant, uncomfortable dampness that permeated every aspect of your existence. You'd bring the cold metal of your rifle to your shoulder, and the very act of gripping it felt like an intimate betrayal, the steel a conductor for the biting air making your fingers ache. Your breath, a constant cloud, would immediately fog and cling to the dirt walls of your makeshift refuge, a transient icy condensation marking your temporary presence. It was a stark reminder of how little stood between you and the elements. Driven by this desperate need for any marginal improvement, you and your comrades would meticulously stack frozen logs, a puzzle of heavy unwieldy timber, or weave in fir branches their needles already stiff with ice to thicken the walls. Any bit of torn canvas, any scrap of twisted metal found in the wreckage of a skirmish would be pressed into service-patching windholes that seemed to magically reappear. You'd spend hours on these efforts, the sound of your boots crunching over old leaves and powder-dry snow making every movement feel amplified, every sound a potential betrayal of your position in the vast exposed silence of the forest. Sometimes a brief, almost dreamlike respite would appear in the form of an abandoned barn or a shell-pocked house. These weren't havens, not truly, but they offered an illusion of safety, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing elements. The air inside might still carry faint echoes of a life now gone, the ghost of wood polish, the faint comforting scent of old bread, or the pervasive earthy smell of mildew. These sensations provided a psychological reprieve far more than true safety, a moment to pretend, however briefly, that you weren't caught in the middle of a frozen hell. You remember huddling once between a stack of scratchy hay bales and the dead cold engine of a truck, its metal shell still faintly radiating the memory of heat. You tried not to dream of warmth then, because waking up from such a dream back to the brutal reality of the cold made the chill seep deeper into your bones, more profound and more cruel. The creak of timber adjusting to the cold in an abandoned house, the fragile fractured glass clinging precariously to a broken window frame, shimmering in the moonlight like a forgotten jewel, all spoke of transience of peace, shattered of a world adjusting to a new, harsh normal. The psychological weight of this constant exposure to the elements was immense. Your body itself became a battleground not just against enemy bullets, but against the insidious creeping cold, the persistent damp. This led to a profound physical deterioration, a weariness that seeped beyond aching muscles and into your very thoughts, making decision-making a sluggish, effortful process. You couldn't escape the pervasive stench of damp wool and diesel, nesting deep in your sinuses, a smell that became synonymous with your existence. And the constant cold made your toes feel like someone else's, distant, numb, a part of you, yet alien, barely responsive to your will. Privacy, you realize, is a forgotten luxury. Shelters, whether a rudimentary foxhole or a slightly more substantial lean-to, are almost always shared spaces. You might find yourself sharing a foxhole with Rudy, whose quiet muttering of multiplication tables, a habit from his pre-war life, became a strange comfort, a way for him to keep his mind sharp, or perhaps simply to escape the oppressive silence that threatened to consume you both. Even sleeping in a ditch became a common reality, your coat smelling like wet bark and old smoke, emphasizing just how deeply the harsh environment had integrated itself into your daily existence. Any chance of warmth, no matter how fleeting or weak, was cherished. A small, struggling fire from frozen twigs barely enough to warm your stiff hands was a luxury, its flickering light offering a momentary illusion of comfort. But not hearts. You'd often think, recognizing that even the most desperate warmth couldn't thaw the persistent emotional chill that settled deep within. You'd pass abandoned vehicles like an Opel Blitz, its metal skin riddled with bullet holes transformed into a temporary skeletal shelter. Their broken, dilapidated state windows shattered, tires, deflated mirrors gone perfectly mirrored the overall dilapidation of your war experience, a decaying world where survival was a daily desperate act and genuine comfort, a distant, almost forgotten memory. The grim reality of your daily existence, starkly defined by inadequate shelter, finds its equally harsh counterpart in the meagre diet and constant struggle for sustenance. Scarcity and monotony become the defining characteristics of your rations. Your daily diet consists of basic, often questionable items: hard crackers, a slice of sausage whose origins you'd prefer not to ponder, and perhaps a small, waxy piece of cheese. Anything beyond this meagre offering is usually scrounged, a testament to desperation rather than provision. You recall waiting in line for rations that might not come, the air around you a strange mixture of wood smoke, grease, and whatever passes for coffee. It's a smell that becomes a constant low-level ache in your stomach, a prelude to the disappointment that often follows. You've learned to recognise the taste of acorn coffee, or what you suspect is some kind of bark brewed into a murky liquid, faintly of burnt wood with an unpleasant medicinal aftertaste. Sometimes a tiny ration of condensed milk, metallic and sickly sweet, consumed straight from the dented tin, offers a brief, almost luxurious moment of sugary relief. Meals are a testament to improvisation and an utter disregard for palatability. You resort to eating whatever is available, whether it's frozen stew, its congealed mass-defying definition, or cold beans from a dented tin, the metal flavour seeping into the blandness. You remember being offered a spoonful of stew that was more frozen than liquid, yet accepting it gratefully, the cold mass a welcome weight in your empty stomach, a brief illusion of fullness. Such moments highlight the desperate measures taken to fulfill the most basic of human needs. One particular memory stands out of vivid, almost cruel irony: the sight and smell of fresh cabbages piled high on a stalled civilian cart. Untouchable, unattainable, they underscored the pervasive hunger and the deep simmering frustration with the logistical failures that plagued the German troops. You recall the strangely mundane last thought before sleep often being, "You never did get any of those cabbages." It's a thought that in its simplicity speaks volumes about the disconnect between the grand strategic offensive and the soldier's basic unfulfilled desires. Yet amidst this deprivation, any item of better quality, however small, holds immense psychological value. You vividly remember the taste of real chocolate from a captured American crate, a bar slightly melted and refrozen. You ate it in slow, reverent bites after days of deprivation, and it tasted like childhood. A fleeting, almost sacred connection to a world of normalcy and comfort that felt impossibly far away. Access to drinkable water is another constant, insidious challenge. Your canteens are often frozen shut, a solid block of ice defying your thirst. Even when you manage to chip away at the ice or find some snow to melt the resulting liquid, often tastes of pine bark and old leather, or carries a faint, unpleasant tang of rust from the canteen itself. You find yourself grateful even for water that vaguely tastes of metal and mould, knowing it's still better than nothing. The desperate need for hydration sometimes leads to the consumption of boiled socks. Coffee, a grim joke that carries more truth than humour. In these dire circumstances, the act of sharing becomes profoundly meaningful. Even minimal rations, a can of condensed milk, a spoonful of cold beans, or a sliver of that rare chocolate, strengthens the bonds between comrades. It's a quiet, shared understanding, a momentary act of humanity that makes the meagre sustenance feel more meaningful, more substantial than its actual caloric value. The distinct odours of the field kitchen or what passed for it mingle with the general dampness and cold, creating a constant sensory reminder of food's absence or its poor quality for the German soldiers. You grow accustomed to the smell of thin, watery potato soup or the greasy scent of whatever low-grade fat is being rendered. And even abandoned civilian homes where the lingering comforting smell of cooked potatoes or fresh-baked bread might still hang in the cold air offered no relief. Hastily deserted before troops could benefit, they served as ghostly reminders of a civilian life that, like fresh food, was just beyond your grasp. A cruel taunt in the perpetual ache of hunger that defined your days. Beyond the gnawing hunger and the inadequate shelter, the pervasive dampness and utter lack of personal hygiene become a daily grinding assault on your body and spirit. The constant wetness from snow and melted slush means your socks are perpetually soaked, never truly drying out. This, you know, is the precursor to trench foot, a debilitating condition that can render a soldier useless. Every step is a calculation, a grim assessment of how long your boots, already worn and cracked, will last in this snow, or if that cold seeping in through a loose seam will soon lead to a boot leaking a sock, slipping making movement a painful, agonizing effort. You feel the cold creeping in through the sole like water through a crack in a boat, an insidious invasion that makes your feet feel like dead weight. Basic cleaning is a forgotten luxury. Shaving becomes a distant memory, your face covered in a rough, uneven stubble that collects grime and frost. Your clothing, never truly warm, becomes saturated with dampness, a heavy, cold, second skin imbued with the accumulated smells of the front damp earth, stale sweat, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present diesel. You recall Hans, a younger comrade, scraping at his invisible stubble with a dull, almost useless razor, like it's a sacred ritual. It's a poignant, almost desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of pre-war personal routine, a fragile anchor to a lost sense of self amidst the overwhelming filth. But even these small acts are often thwarted by the elements. Personal items like your canteen are prone to freezing shut, rendering them useless precisely when you need them most. Your fingers, stiff and numb with cold, become too clumsy to even work bootlaces, turning simple tasks into monumental frustrations. You reach for your canteen, your throat parched, only to find it a solid block of ice, the realization intensifying your feeling of helplessness. You and your comrades present a uniform picture of exhaustion and neglect, pale, dirty, tired. This isn't just a surface observation. It reflects the relentless nature of your existence, the impossibility of maintaining cleanliness or even basic comfort in the field. The pervasive smell like wet bark and old smoke clings to your coat after sleeping in a ditch, a constant sensory reminder of your deep integration with the harsh environment. You learn to make small, desperate adjustments. Wrapping your boots in rags, a futile but necessary attempt to add a thin layer of protection, becomes a familiar habit. You pull your scarf up almost to your eyes, trying to warm your own breath to create a tiny fleeting pocket of warmth against the biting air. Your coats with linings coming apart at the armpits, and your scuffed, battered boots are constant visible reminders of inadequate equipment and the prolonged harsh conditions you endure. The cold is so extreme that it transcends mere discomfort. It becomes a burning sensation. It can burn your palms through the gloves, or make your exposed skin sting, then go numb, then disappear from your awareness altogether. A disquieting sensation that your body is slowly, silently abandoning you. This inability to achieve basic cleanliness, to feel truly clean, contributes to a profound, pervasive sense of degradation. You feel stripped of dignity, reduced to a primal state of survival, where such niceties are irrelevant. Yet a part of you still longs for them, for the simple comfort of clean clothes, a warm wash, a moment of unblemished personal space. But that longing remains just that, a longing constantly overshadowed by the immediate overwhelming reality of dampness, dirt, and the unyielding cold that has become your constant unwelcome companion in the Ardennes. Beyond the personal discomforts of cold and grime, your daily existence is defined by relentless labour and a crushing weight of responsibility. The primary, most pervasive daily labour involves endless, exhausting marching through difficult terrain. Every step feels like lifting weights, the heavy snow-laden ground sucking at your boots, demanding immense effort. The cold itself transforms movement, turning each swing of your arm, each lift of your leg into a dull, weighty effort, as if the air itself has thickened into a viscous gel. You trudge uphill, downhill, through twisting, snow-covered paths, some of which you swear you've walked before, highlighting the repetitive, disorienting nature of this ceaseless movement. There's a constant low whisper of wool against wool, as men try to move silently, a collective, almost unconscious effort, punctuated only by the high-pitched squeak of snow under your boots, a sound that feels amplified and exposed in the otherwise quiet frozen forest. Combat preparations and fortification are another core responsibility demanding grim determination even in the face of constant threats. You and your comrades are tasked with digging and reinforcing those rudimentary foxholes positions that always feel temporary and vulnerable. You lay out ammunition, ensuring clips are ready and accessible despite stiff fingers. Setting booby traps, often crude but effective, requires a chilling focus, and sighting rifles through the swirling fog or falling snow demands unwavering concentration. You remember spending an entire afternoon improving a cover, meticulously stacking frozen logs and adding fir branches, knowing even as you worked that it would only help a little. But a little was often all you could hope for. A small, desperate increment of safety bought with raw physical effort. Equipment maintenance, particularly for your rifle, becomes a critical, almost ritualistic task. When your rifle jams, as it often does in the extreme cold and damp cleaning and clearing, it becomes a slow, careful process, a desperate hope for ensuring your own survival. You work the rifle bolt gently, coaxing it, meticulously removing every speck of snow or ice from its crevices, your thoughts dwelling on the cold metal, shrinking and sticking the tolerances tightening. This isn't just maintenance, it's a personal plea to the inanimate object, an unspoken negotiation with fate. Often your daily labour is diverted to logistical support, overcoming the constant obstacles that plague the offensive. You might find yourself pushing a stalled vehicle, its heavy tyres bogged down in thick mud or deep snow, the effort leaving you covered in muck, too tired to swear, while the driver, if you're unlucky, speeds off without so much as a thank you. Or you could be stringing wire for a temporary bridge, a task demanding not just physical exertion, but also ingenuity, making use of whatever scarce materials are at hand. Sentry duty, perhaps the most psychologically demanding of your daily tasks, is a constant test of endurance. You stand watch, often alone for hours in the extreme cold, your back against a tree rifle across your knees, nothing but the snow for company. Every shadow, every gust of wind, every distant rustle becomes amplified, transformed into a potential threat. You scan the inky blackness for flares, for the silhouette of an approaching enemy aircraft, for any sign of movement in the deceptive snow-laden landscape. The tedium of waiting often proves as mentally exhausting as physical action. Periods of intense, frantic combat are interspersed with long stretches of waiting, often in cramped, cold conditions, contributing to a profound mental fatigue that wears you down as much as the physical demands. The terrain itself extracts a heavy toll. Navigating waist-deep snowdrifts where every step is a lunge and frozen marshy ground, where a misplaced foot threatens an accidental bath in slush, makes every step a taxing decision, every movement fraught with potential mishap. This unending requirement to march even when your legs feel like concrete and every breath burns in your lungs creates a dull background ache that feels permanent, an inescapable part of your very being, a constant reminder of the relentless physical demands of this brutal campaign. Amidst the relentless physical demands and daily struggles, a profound and quiet transformation begins to occur within you. A redefinition of what it means to be educated, a painful loss of youthful normalcy. The war has thrust young German men, some barely out of childhood, into unimaginably harsh realities. You see it in the faces of your comrades, particularly the younger ones, their former lives and innocence starkly contrasted with the present dangers. You recall observing one boy Hans isn't even shaving yet, but he performs the ritual anyway, scraping at invisible stubble with a dull razor. It's a poignant, almost desperate clinging to a pre-war normalcy, a fragile anchor to a lost sense of self amidst the overwhelming filth. But even these small acts are often thwarted by the elements. Personal items like your canteen are prone to freezing shut, rendering them useless, precisely when you need them most. Your fingers, stiff and numb with cold, become too clumsy to even work bootlaces, turning simple tasks into monumental frustrations. You reach for your canteen, your throat parched only to find it a solid block of ice, the realization intensifying your feeling of helplessness. Formal education with its books and lectures and youthful aspirations of careers and futures are brutally superseded by the practical, brutal learning of combat and survival skills. Interpreting vague orders that hint at a broader unknowable strategy, identifying enemy tracks in the snow, understanding the treacherous nuances of frozen terrain. These become your new curriculum. Rudy, who once studied engineering, now mutters artillery calculations like bedtime poetry. His academic knowledge twisted and applied to the grim realities of targeting and destruction. His former dreams of building bridges or designing machines are now overshadowed by the immediate need to calculate trajectories for shells that bring death. The endless, often directionless marching, coupled with the breakdown of clear objectives, gradually strips away any sense of a defined future. You exist in a perpetual present of immediate survival, rather than working towards long-term goals. The feeling that stopping isn't an option, even as your splitting boot heel becomes just how life works now, illustrates this profound loss of future. You're simply enduring moving without a clear destination or purpose beyond the next ridge the next night. This constant exposure to suffering, loss, and the absurdities of war leads to an emotional hardening, a quiet desensitization. You find that extreme events, once shocking, now elicit little outward reaction. You remember a pine branch heavy with snow suddenly dumping its frozen load down your back, and you don't even react. It's not defiance, it's just a quiet acceptance, a testament to how profoundly your emotional landscape has shifted. Even amidst a major offensive grand in its scope and tragic in its ambition, your concerns often remain deeply personal and mundane. The unfulfilled craving for those cabbages, a small, simple desire, lingers in your thoughts, highlighting the stark contrast between individual primal needs and the abstract, often incomprehensible strategic objectives. That strangely mundane last thought before sleep, "You never did get any of those cabbages," encapsulates the profound disconnect. A growing cynicism and disillusionment with leadership begin to settle, in particularly among the younger, less experienced German soldiers. The vast gap between the grand pronouncements of officers in distant command posts and the harsh, immediate realities on the ground fosters a quiet skepticism. You hear the brave speeches, then you look at your frozen, hungry comrades, and the words feel hollow, almost a mockery. Encounters with enemy soldiers, especially in non-combat situations, occasionally serve to humanize the adversary, challenging ingrained propaganda and offering fleeting glimpses of shared humanity. You might see a captured American equally tired and cold and realize he's just another man caught in the same hell. The war abruptly halted education, careers and personal dreams. Your previous ambitions now seem distant, almost irrelevant, replaced by a singular, immediate focus on day-to-day survival. The fragility of life plans has been brutally exposed, leaving you with nothing but the present moment and the unyielding grip of the Ardennes winter. While your daily life was a relentless confrontation with physical and psychological hardships, these personal struggles were inextricably linked to the broader unforgiving conditions and systemic failures that defined the entire Battle of the Bulge. This interconnectedness, you realize, is the foundational reality shaping your existence. The immense weight of a distant command, the chaotic struggle for every scrap of resource, and the raw, unbridled fury of nature itself. These aren't just background elements. They are the very forces that dictate every step you take, every bite you might or might not eat, and every moment of uneasy sleep. From the mud in your gloves to the ache in your bones, every discomfort, every fear can be traced back to the grand yet flawed design of this offensive. You find yourself observing the vast impersonal machinery of war and seeing its direct brutal impact on the human scale. The soldier's experience isn't an isolated incident. It's a direct consequence of decisions made far away logistical lines that buckle under pressure and a landscape that cares nothing for human ambition. This constant interplay between the macro and the micro becomes clear. Your freezing feet are a result of inadequate supply lines, your gnawing hunger a product of logistical chaos, your fear a direct response to a strategic gamble that has gone horribly wrong. The personal is in essence a reflection of the systemic, and as you try to make sense of your immediate moment-to-moment reality, you can't help but perceive the outlines of the larger forces at play slowly but surely, grinding down both the grand offensive and the individual men caught within it. It's a profound, if unspoken, understanding that settles deep within your weary mind, transforming your battle for survival into a testament to a much larger, more tragic narrative. Amidst the pervasive cold and hunger, a stark understanding emerges regarding the inescapable social hierarchy and its profound distortions in war. The offensive, you know, was driven by Hitler's audacious orders. From your foxhole, these directives seem grand on paper, but utterly disconnected from the visceral, muddy, frozen reality you experience daily. You hear the pronouncement, "The Führer has plans," offered by a stressed junior officer as a vague assurance amidst your concrete doubts about reinforcements. These words, you realize, are not for you, but for the illusion of control they project. Within the Wehrmacht itself, hierarchical divisions become acutely apparent. You as a regular army soldier belong to the Wehrmacht, a different breed from the elite units like the SS. This distinction fosters a complex relationship, a sense of distinct identity rules, and even a quiet distrust. Wehrmacht, a regular. You try to keep your head down. You often think to yourself a mantra born of caution. There are quiet jokes never spoken too loudly about aiming low if black coats, the SS, are seen nearby, a dark humour that reveals deep internal divisions within the German forces, a schism in loyalty and method. These are not your comrades in the same way your immediate squad is. Junior officers caught between the impossible orders filtering down from above and the deteriorating morale and conditions of their men often bear a visible strain. They appear wide-eyed and slightly green around the edges, their youth and inexperience starkly exposed by the immense pressures. You recall an officer dodging a question about reaching the Meuse, like he's dancing on hot coals, a telling moment that highlights the precariousness of their position, the unspoken understanding that their pronouncements are often based on hope rather than certainty. Yet amidst this strain, non-commissioned officers, NCOs like Schaefer, serve as a crucial grounding presence. He is a veteran, his silence often more reassuring than any empty promise. His practical actions, the meticulous polishing of a buckle, the quiet offer of a piece of his meagre bread, offer a different kind of leadership amidst the chaos, a stability born of experience and stoicism. Schaefer endures without complaint a constant, unwavering presence that provides a quiet, almost familial comfort. Regardless of your individual skill or bravery, you understand your fixed destiny as a common soldier. You're a cog in a much larger, increasingly grinding machine, your role defined by orders from a distant command, emphasizing a profound lack of personal agency. Your destiny is not your own to shape. You remember being told today you are an engineer despite your actual training being something entirely different. This illustrates the arbitrary nature of wartime assignments, the way individual skills are overridden by immediate desperate needs. You observe the appearance of authority clean collar, tabs an overly excited voice from a briefing officer, all contrasting sharply with your own weary appearance and that of your frontline comrades. This visual disparity underscores the deep disconnect within the hierarchy, a gulf between those who command and those who execute. As conditions worsen, the traditional deference to authority begins to wane. It's not open defiance, but a quiet grumbling, an unspoken skepticism, that replaces unquestioning obedience, a subtle but significant shift among the German troops, a quiet erosion of faith in the grand architects of this frozen hell. As the vast overarching structure of command begins to chafe against the brutal realities on the ground, you become acutely aware of the core economy of war, a chaotic system of resource management that consistently fails to meet the demands of the offensive. Fuel, you quickly learn, is the absolute lifeblood of this campaign. Its shortages are a critical and constant reality directly impacting every inch of the offensive's momentum. It becomes a source of intense anxiety, whispered rumours and desperate improvisation throughout the German army. You see fuel drums guarded like treasure more precious than gold. There are grim stories too, like the rumours of a soldier siphoning gas from a colonel's staff car, only to disappear completely shortly after a chilling underscore of its immense, almost sacred value and the harsh consequences for those who transgress. The pervasive smell like engine oil and desperation hangs heavy in the air around stalled convoys, a scent that becomes synonymous with the offensive's flagging ambition. The entire supply chain, you realise, is a logistical nightmare plagued by chaos. Critical resources like ammunition and rations are not just insufficient, they're often damaged or entirely absent, leading to deep gnawing frustration among German soldiers. You remember approaching a supposed supply checkpoint, your hopes cautiously rising, only to find a single tent half collapsed, one crate of ammunition soaking wet, two young soldiers shivering around a stove that isn't lit. It's a scene that perfectly encapsulates the systematic failure, the disconnect between expectation and reality. Even when supplies do arrive, they're often inferior or recycled. You're frequently equipped with old, worn or mismatched gear, some of it clearly recycled from another unit, maybe another war, a stark signal of the dire state of German wartime production and resource depletion. A helmet strap might crack under your cold fingers. Your mess kit bears someone else's initials, a ghost from a previous campaign, and even basic items like white camouflage, crucial for the snowy environment, are absent. You scrape at invisible stubble with a dull razor, a small personal reminder of the poor quality of even your most basic personal gear. The movement of troops and supplies is severely hampered by an absurd mix of vehicles. Horse carts antiquated and slow mingle with stalled tanks, their modern engines silent in the snow, creating massive traffic jams that cripple the advance. You once saw a panzer, a symbol of modern warfare, waiting impatiently for a mule to get out of its way, an absurd juxtaposition that highlights the blend of the modern and the archaic, the efficient and the utterly inefficient that defines this campaign. The infrastructure itself conspires against you. Roads are often poorly maintained, quickly become ice-covered or turn into treacherous mud pits. This further exacerbates the logistical challenges, leading to vehicles becoming bogged down or abandoned, a particularly devastating problem for the heavy German armour which needs clear, firm routes. You pass a Panther tank, once a formidable weapon, now half buried in snow, its turret turned backward, the hatch open. A chalk message scrawled on its side, "We're comin' nie an. We're never arriving." It's a grim epitaph for a stalled offensive. In this environment of systematic failure, a grim economy of scavenging emerges. You resort to scrounging for abandoned equipment, perhaps a pair of slightly less damaged boots from a wrecked truck, or captured enemy supplies like American chocolate or cigarettes to meet basic needs. These small finds, though morally questionable, highlight the complete breakdown of official supply. The phrase 3 clips short of ammo for your rifle, and the description of your rations as crackers, a questionable sausage, and something that used to be cheese, paint a vivid, immediate picture of the sparse resources available to you, the German soldier. This isn't just a battle against the enemy, it's a constant grinding war against the limitations of your own crumbling supply lines, a silent daily struggle for survival that takes precedence over any grand distant objective. As you grapple with the crumbling logistical infrastructure and the rigid yet failing hierarchy, you face an adversary even more relentless and pervasive nature's relentless fury. The crippling cold is not merely a discomfort, it is depicted as a more immediate and constant threat than enemy fire, a silent, insidious killer. It's the kind of cold that turns your breath into instant icicles on your collar, a constant visual reminder of its power. It makes your skin sting, then go numb, then simply disappear from your awareness, a disquieting sensation of bodily abandonment. Even the metal of the tanks, those hulking giants of steel, becomes so cold it burns your palms through the gloves. When you touch it, a paradox of extreme temperature that sears rather than chills. This cold is not just a backdrop. It is a primary omnipresent antagonist. The Ardennes Forest, with its ancient gnarled trees, presents a treacherous terrain that is inherently disorienting. Its twisting paths, deep, deceptive snowdrifts, and seemingly identical ridges conspire against you, causing German units to get lost, to wander in circles, and rendering your maps, which are often out of date or poorly detailed, utterly useless. You recall the unsettling experience of walking in what felt like a giant circle, only to end up back at the same clearing you'd left hours ago, a profound sense of the terrain's ability to confound and frustrate. The forest itself feels alive, hostile, playing tricks on your tired mind. Persistent fog, thick and low, frequently envelops the landscape. On one hand, it offers a temporary blessed cover from Allied air reconnaissance, a brief reprieve from the omnipresent threat from above. But on the other, it creates profound disorientation, reducing visibility to mere meters, increasing the psychological toll on you and your comrades. The fog is a thick, low soup that wraps around your boots and climbs your legs like a cat with cold paws, a living, breathing entity that isolates and obscures. It magnifies every sound, makes every shadow a potential threat, and twists familiar landmarks into alien shapes, increasing the sense of unease and vulnerability. The impact of this shifting weather on the offensive's momentum is undeniable, a constant crushing reminder of your vulnerability to forces beyond your control. The periods of low visibility and thick fog which initially provided cover are inevitably followed by clear skies. And when the clouds have lifted and the fog has cleared for good, the true horror appears, a swarm of angry gods, Allied planes suddenly filling the sky. This swift change in weather directly exposes German forces to the overwhelming Allied air superiority, highlighting how profoundly environmental factors shape strategic outcomes for the Battle of the Bulge. The natural protection you briefly enjoyed vanishes, replaced by the terrifying sound of roaring engines and the whistle of bombs. The combination of extreme cold, relentless physical exertion, and poor nutrition leads to a profound systemic fatigue that permeates every aspect of your being. Your body feels slow, wrapped in wool and fatigue, moving as if underwater. Your joints creak like frozen hinges. Upon waking, each movement a painful effort, a protest from your overtaxed body. This isn't just tiredness. It's an all-encompassing weariness, an invisible iron that makes every movement heavy, every thought sluggish. And through it all, nature remains indifferent. The forest and its animals are silent, unconcerned observers. Nature doesn't care who wins wars, you often reflect. It just absorbs them, recycles them into stillness. Even amidst this brutality, there are fleeting moments of harsh beauty. Sunlight glinting off a pristine snowdrift, the intricate pattern of ice on a frozen leaf. But these are quickly shattered by the realities of war, a fleeting glimpse of peace that only serves to underscore the pervasive suffering. These foundational realities of weather command and resource scarcity directly shape the operational landscape, profoundly impacting the concrete mechanisms of power control and the inevitable human responses to such an unyielding system. You're not merely experiencing the war, You're a direct conduit through which these immense forces flow, feeling their pressure on every aspect of your existence. The biting cold, for instance, isn't just a physical discomfort. It dictates the pace of your movements, the effectiveness of your equipment, and the very endurance of your body, thereby directly influencing the strategic outcomes planned by distant generals. The disconnect between High Command's grand vision and your ground-level reality becomes a central theme of this segment of your experience. You see how the failure of a supply truck miles away translates into your own gnawing hunger, how a weather forecast in a distant office determines whether you face unseen danger or the horror of an aerial assault. This direct causal link means that what might seem like abstract military doctrines or environmental factors are for you immediate and visceral realities. They are the forces that literally push and pull you across the frozen landscape, dictating whether you advance, retreat, or simply endure in a static, freezing hell. The control exerted by the command structure, though often flawed, is absolute, trickling down from Hitler's audacious orders to the desperate shouts of your junior officers. And the sheer chaos of logistics, the constant struggle for fuel and rations, is a direct challenge to that control. In essence, your daily confrontation with cold, hunger and fatigue is a micro-reflection of the strategic failures, the environmental challenges and the hierarchical pressures that define the Battle of the Bulge. It's a continuous grinding test of both the individual and the system, with your own body and mind becoming the ultimate gauges of its success or failure. This realization, a quiet understanding of your place within this vast, unforgiving machine, adds another layer of gravity to your ongoing struggle. As the grand strategic goals dissolved into chaos, and the elements conspired against the offensive, you became intimately familiar with the unyielding power hierarchy in practice, a system often indifferent to human cost. Hitler's audacious orders, the very impetus for this offensive, seemed grand and sweeping when viewed from above, but from your perspective, they translated directly into impossible marches, inadequate supplies, and a pervasive sense of being utterly disconnected from the decision-makers. The repeated pronouncement, "The Führer has plans," offered by officers as a vague assurance, now elicits quiet internal skepticism. You've seen too much, felt too much cold, experienced too many failures for such pronouncements to carry genuine weight anymore. The precariousness of leadership becomes increasingly evident as the offensive grinds on. Junior officers, many of whom are little more than boys themselves, struggle to maintain morale and cohesion. They often appear wide-eyed and slightly green around the edges, their youth and inexperience betrayed by their strained expressions. Their orders frequently lack clarity, betraying their own uncertainty. You'll know your objective when you see it. One might declare a statement that offers no real guidance in the swirling fog and featureless snow. You remember a captain, his face contorted with frustration, nearly losing his voice, yelling at a peasant who stubbornly refused to move his cabbage cart out of the narrow path of a column. This small absurd interaction demonstrates the limits of military authority against civilian stubbornness, and perhaps a language barrier. It's a stark reminder that even the grandest military machine can be thwarted by the most mundane of obstacles. Orders, despite their inherent flaws and the doubts they inspire, still cascade down the chain of command, demanding unquestioning obedience. This obedience is expected even when your internal doubts scream about the sheer infeasibility or questionable wisdom of the mission. You might catch yourself thinking, you'd almost laugh if your toes weren't screaming with numbness in response to a briefing officer pointing at confusing outdated maps, highlighting your suppressed dissent. It's a quiet internal rebellion, a stark contrast to the outward conformity. As the offensive increasingly falters and signs of retreat become undeniable, High Command resorts to euphemisms. You hear official talk of strategic repositioning or a realignment of momentum, phrases designed to mask clear failure and retreat. These linguistic gymnastics underscore the political control over military reality for the German army a desperate attempt to maintain appearances even as the front crumbles. You, however, don't need a memo to recognize a backwards march. Your observations of abandoned equipment and broken units tell you everything after hearing talk of consolidation. As the Battle of the Bulge devolves further, the command structure itself begins to fray. Command posts going silent, and orders that never arrive become increasingly common, leaving German units isolated and directionless. You remember seeing a group of 5 stray German soldiers on a ridge, their faces a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. No orders, no objective, no commanding officer. You think observing their indecision, their palpable sense of being abandoned. The sheer absurdity of the situation is sometimes almost comical in its bleakness. You once observed a Wehrkehrsoldat with white gloves and a whistle, attempting to direct chaotic battle traffic in a bombed-out clearing. This traffic policeman, a symbol of rigid order, seemed utterly out of place, highlighting the futile attempts of a centralized command to impose structure on an unmanageable, unraveling situation. Eventually the final order arrived, not explicitly a retreat, but to fall back, destroy radios and burn papers. These commands, though veiled in official jargon, carry the immense weight of official recognition of failure, marking a strategic shift, a quiet admission that the audacious plan has irrevocably broken. Underneath the failing command and the crumbling logistical support, a darker, more primal reality asserts itself, the shadow of death, and the brutal discipline it imposes, a military justice enforced not by courts, but by cold steel and crushing desperation. Death is an ever-present reality, an uninvited companion that stalks you in many forms. It comes from direct enemy fire, the sudden impact of a bullet. It arrives with a whistling roar of artillery, transforming a quiet moment into a hellish symphony of explosions. It can be hidden, a mine buried beneath the pristine snow, a silent, unseen killer. Or it can be as simple and insidious as the elements themselves, the cold slowly claiming a life. You learn to accept this with a grim, almost fatalistic resignation. You recall a moment someone stepped on a mine. He screams once, then bites down on his coat. You don't look, you just keep moving. This illustrative vignette highlights the numbing desensitization to suffering, the necessity of suppressing emotion, to continue functioning in an environment where death is a constant, unavoidable fixture. You hear the whistles, then cracks that shake your ribs, of incoming artillery shells, the geyser of earth and snow erupting nearby, and you simply duck, accepting moving on. Then there is the Malmedy massacre. Even if you weren't directly involved, the rumours and later the confirmed accounts cast a chilling shadow over every German soldier. It instills not only a profound fear of the enemy, but also disturbingly a fear of elements within your own side, particularly the SS. This event alters the very nature of surrender. You realise that being captured now carries a horrifying new dimension, a possibility of brutality that goes beyond the normal risks of war. The story has a profound impact, making everything feel different. Now the snow feels tainted. You think realising the pristine white landscape now carries the stain of atrocity. This massacre, a grim act committed by a specific unit, changes the dynamics of the entire fight. It hardens American resistance, making them less likely to take prisoners, and it instills an even deeper, more primal fear in German soldiers about being captured. You notice the American prisoner's jaw tensing his eyes, betraying fear not necessarily of you, but of something else, the unseen shadow of the SS column you later see gliding past like wolves in uniform. Implicit in your continued movement and stoicism amidst immense hardship is an acceptance of sacrifice. A few men might be missing from your ranks at the end of a long march, and no one says anything. Not yet. There's no time for that. This quiet resignation, this suppression of grief, implies a profound understanding and acceptance of military expectations regarding sacrifice. It's a silent pact with destiny. As the offensive increasingly fails, built upon false premises and impossible odds, a quiet questioning of the purpose and legitimacy of your ongoing suffering and potential death begins to grow. The realization that it was all for naught, that the grand plan was a delusion, makes the eventual quiet order to retreat feel worse than all the bullets. It's the psychological blow of wasted effort of lives thrown away for an illusion. The landscape itself becomes a constant visual reminder of death and destruction. You pass abandoned shot-up trucks, their metal skins torn and twisted. You see frozen corpses of fallen trees, shattered and lifeless, echoing the human toll. These images become part of the everyday landscape, a normal fixture in this desolate world. And through it all, there's the unsettling feeling that death can strike arbitrarily, indiscriminately. Shrapnel. You know, the kind that doesn't care where it lands or who it finds, contributed to a pervasive sense of helplessness, even fatalism. You're simply a target exposed to the whims of chance and the impersonal brutality of war, waiting for fate to play its hand. As the grim shadow of death looms large and the breakdown of military discipline becomes palpable, you encounter another persistent source of frustration, one that feels both trivial and deeply significant: civilian obstacles and the logistical headaches they create. Local civilians, whether out of stubbornness, a fierce attachment to their property, or simply an inability to understand the urgency of your movements due to language barriers, could inadvertently or sometimes deliberately impede German military movements. This friction highlights a constant, often absurd tension between grand military objectives and the irreducible reality of local life. You recall with a mix of exasperation and a hollow kind of amusement the infamous mule cart incident. A peasant, his face etched with defiance or perhaps just bewilderment, stubbornly refused to move his cabbage cart out of the narrow path. This led to what became a legendary shouting match, a cacophony of frustrated German commands and impassive civilian replies, culminating in a significant, infuriating delay for an entire military column. The absurdity of such local resistance underscores the wider logistical breakdown and the inherent illogicalities of the war on the ground. You can't help but think, you can't decide what's more surreal: German tanks in a surprise offensive, or the fact that the tank is waiting for a mule to get out of the way. It's a moment of profound irony, a tableau that perfectly captures the disconnect between the high-stakes offensive and the petty everyday struggles that can bring it to a halt. These petty frustrations, when compounded by the larger systemic failures, relentlessly chipped away at morale. They reinforce a growing sense of the mission's futility for you, the German soldier. Each stalled cart, each obstinate peasant becomes a small, nagging victory for the chaos you're fighting. The peasant in that moment prioritizes his cabbages over German military movement. This simple act reveals a local economy, a local way of life, operating with its own logic, entirely indifferent to the grand designs of your military offensive. It's a stark contrast, a reminder that outside the military bubble life continues, albeit precariously. You're acutely aware of the distinct smell of real cabbages, fresh ghee, a sensory detail that pierces through the pervasive odours of war, a fleeting reminder of a world that still produces and consumes, untouched by the immediate destructive nature of your purpose. Beyond such direct confrontations, you encounter the silent, haunting presence of abandoned villages. Civilians fleeing the advancing lines or the coming battle have deserted their homes, leaving behind silent, ghost-like villages. These abandoned places underscore the immense human cost and the widespread disruption inflicted upon the local populace. You walk through these quiet, empty streets, a profound sense of desolation settling over you. Sometimes homes are left in perfect order, as if the occupant simply stepped out for a moment and would return. Other times they're found deserted mid-meal, a half-eaten plate, a forgotten toy telling a story of hurried flight. These small, intimate details, a child's toy lying abandoned in the snow, a cooking pot still on a cold hearth, speak volumes about the lives abruptly uprooted, a silent exodus, leaving behind a chilling testament to the war's far-reaching impact, a constant unspoken weight on your conscience. As the grim shadow of death looms large and the breakdown of military discipline became palpable, you encountered another persistent source of frustration, one that felt both trivial and deeply significant: civilian obstacles and the logistical headaches they created. Local civilians, whether out of stubbornness, a fierce attachment to their property, or simply an inability to understand the urgency of your movements due to language barriers, could inadvertently or sometimes deliberately impede German military movements. This friction highlighted a constant, often absurd tension between grand military objectives and the irreducible reality of local life. You recall, for instance, columns grinding to a halt, not because of enemy fire, but because a farmer's herd needed to cross a road or a local cart laden with goods was simply too cumbersome to move quickly from a narrow path. The absurdity of such local resistance underscored the wider logistical breakdown and the inherent illogicalities of the war on the ground. You might find yourself staring at an overturned cart, its contents spilled across a critical route, and think, you can't decide what's more surreal: German tanks in a surprise offensive, or the fact that an entire advance is waiting on a few spilled sacks of potatoes. It's a moment of profound irony, a tableau that perfectly captures the disconnect between the high-stakes offensive and the petty everyday struggles that can bring it to a halt. These petty frustrations, when compounded by larger systemic failures, relentlessly chipped away at morale. They reinforced a growing sense of the mission's futility for you, the German soldier. Each stalled cart, each seemingly obstinate civilian became a small nagging victory for the chaos you're fighting. The peasant in those moments prioritized his cabbages or his livestock over German military movement. This simple act revealed a local economy, a local way of life operating with its own logic, entirely indifferent to the grand designs of your military offensive. It's a stark contrast, a reminder that outside the military bubble life continued, albeit precariously. You were acutely aware of the distinct smell of real cabbages, fresh, a sensory detail that pierced through the pervasive odours of war, a fleeting reminder of a world that still produced and consumed untouched by the immediate destructive nature of your purpose. Beyond such direct confrontations, you encountered the silent, haunting presence of abandoned villages. Civilians fleeing the advancing lines or the coming battle had deserted their homes, leaving behind silent, ghost-like villages. These abandoned places underscored the immense human cost and the widespread disruption inflicted upon the local populace. You walk through these quiet, empty streets, a profound sense of desolation settling over you. Sometimes homes were left in perfect order, as if the occupants simply stepped out for a moment and would return. Other times they were found deserted mid-meal, a half-eaten plate, a forgotten toy telling a story of hurried flight. These small, intimate details, a child's toy lying abandoned in the snow, a cooking pot still on a cold hearth, spoke volumes about the lives abruptly uprooted, a silent exodus, leaving behind a chilling testament to the war's far-reaching impact, a constant unspoken weight on your conscience. As the initial surge of the offensive dissipated into logistical failures and environmental hostility, another insidious adversary emerged: individual isolation, and the profound breakdown of order leading to countless stragglers and lost units. The dense fog and treacherous terrain, already formidable obstacles, frequently conspired to scatter German units, separating comrades and leaving individuals profoundly lost. This created an intense experience of isolation, a terrifying rupture in the military order that usually bound you. You vividly recall the disorienting aftermath of an artillery barrage, the earth still trembling, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke. When the ringing in your ears finally subsided, there's no shouting, no clear regrouping orders, just absence. It's as if your comrades had been picked up and whisked away by some invisible hand, leaving you utterly alone in the swirling mist, the silence pressing in. In this terrifying solitude, a primal instinct took over the search for belonging and direction. Lost German soldiers, you among them, would instinctively seek out other units, any sign of organised presence, or any indication of where to go. This isn't just about finding your way. It's driven by a fundamental need for safety in numbers, a desperate yearning for a return to structure, to the familiar rhythm of command and companionship. You remember spotting a faint silhouette in the swirling fog, your heart leaping with a mix of fear and desperate hope. Then the immense relief upon recognizing the familiar lines of a German uniform leading to a quiet, shared understanding with the stranger. You were both lost, and for a moment you were lost together. The psychological impact of being lost in a seemingly endless identical forest, where every tree looks the same and every path leads to another, is profound. You and your comrades make quiet jokes about the forest spirits, the Waldgeist, a whimsical personification of the environment that seems to actively work against you. Your compass, if it even works in the magnetic anomalies of the Ardennes, spins randomly a useless trinket. The forest seems to play tricks, blurring directions, twisting your sense of north and south, making every decision a gamble. In this state, the mission objectives, those grand distant goals, become utterly irrelevant. Survival, and finding your way back, or at least finding another unit, supersede all previous orders. You remember a small group of lost German soldiers, disoriented and without command, spotting an American unit in the distance. Instead of engaging, they quietly decide to pull back a decision, born of a lack of orders and an overwhelming sense of indecision and vulnerability, a quiet, unspoken abandonment of the offensive. The experience of being lost culminated in a deep-seated weariness too profound for panic. It's replaced by a quiet, persistent determination to simply keep moving one foot in front of the other. You find yourself writing in your small mud-stained notebook, "Lost the others again, fog everywhere, no shots today, found Americans, didn't fire, don't know why, saw a boy, still hear his voice." These fragmented entries capture the surreal and disjointed reality of being a straggler, a silent testament to the breakdown of order and the raw, unadulterated human experience of being utterly alone in a hostile world. Brief encounters with other lost German soldiers offer temporary companionship, fleeting moments of shared purpose. But just as quickly, the group can dissolve again, individuals following different instincts or sounds in the fog, reinforcing the ephemeral nature of connection in this fractured landscape. The dense woods, with their endless identical trunks and heavy canopy, are perceived as a place where anything or anyone could vanish, intensifying the sense of vulnerability and isolation, making the forest itself feel like a vast silent maw ready to swallow you whole. Beyond the direct application of power and the chaos of conflict, the German soldiers' inner world, their communication coping mechanisms and relationships formed the essential social fabric that endured or frayed under pressure. This internal landscape, often as treacherous as the frozen Ardennes, became the true battleground for sanity and self. Here, amidst the relentless external pressures, the subtler yet equally profound human responses played out. Your ability to communicate to cope with the unimaginable, and to maintain any semblance of connection with your comrades and even with your past was constantly tested. The external world imposed its brutal will, but the internal world dictated how you absorbed that impact, how you endured. It was within this delicate social fabric that the deepest resilience or the most profound fracturing occurred. The roar of distant artillery might shake the ground, but the shared glance with a comrade, or the quiet memory of a loved one reverberated within you with a different kind of power. These were the intangible anchors, the threads that connected you not just to your immediate squad, but to a wider humanity, to the past you fought to remember, and to the future you barely dared to imagine. As the physical world dissolved into uncertainty, the psychological and emotional world became paramount, defining not just what you did, but who you became in the face of such overwhelming odds. The real story you understood wasn't just in the battles fought, but in the quiet internal skirmishes of the human heart and mind. Under such duress, the very nature of communication and social etiquette transformed. In a rigid military hierarchy, the peril of openly expressing doubt or negative opinions was ever present, a silent understanding that such dissent could have severe consequences. You learned quickly to internalize your fears and cynicism, communicating instead through subtle glances, a shared shrug, or a profound loaded silence. You vividly recall the moment of the Geoghegan offensive announcement, where instead of enthusiastic applause, you and your comrades simply stared at your boots quietly, calculating how much longer your worn footwear might last in the biting snow. This collective unspoken judgment communicated far more than any shouted words ever could, a silent language of weary disillusionment. The power of silence and nonverbal cues became paramount for survival. Under constant threat, silence itself became a shared language, punctuated by the smallest gestures, a nod of understanding, a weary shrug of resignation, or a shared recognition in another's eyes that conveyed volumes without a single word being uttered. Schaefer, the seasoned NCO, embodied this, his frequent nods or quiet presence communicating understanding and shared burden, even when he offered you a piece of his precious bread. It was a language understood at a deeper, almost instinctual level, a bond forged in shared misery. Gallows humour, that dark ironic wit, emerged as a crucial coping mechanism for stress and despair. It allowed you and your comrades to momentarily acknowledge the profound absurdity of your situation. You might hear a wry joke about precision engineering after a German Kübelwagen stubbornly refused to start in the freezing morning, or the dry observation that the mule is the smartest one here after an entire panzer column was stalled by a civilian cart. These moments of bleak wit, though fleeting, were vital outlets for maintaining a semblance of sanity. The fragility of speech itself was keenly felt. Every spoken word seemed too loud in the eerie quiet of the snow-laden forest, a potential beacon for enemy ears capable of betraying your position. Conversely, in the hurried, noisy confines of a briefing, words often melted together into an incomprehensible jumble, making precise communication difficult and often secondary to sharp observation and intuition. You relied heavily on the whisper chain of orders passed down the line, praying that the message didn't distort too much as it moved from mouth to ear. The sudden jarring sound of someone swearing in full volume would make everyone wince, freezing in place, waiting for the inevitable, terrifying reply from an unseen enemy. Yet amidst this profound isolation and constant danger, unexpected connections born of shared vulnerability could still arise. You vividly remember an encounter with an American soldier, perhaps a lost straggler or a captured prisoner. Sharing a cigarette, a simple, primal gesture, transcended the language barrier and ideological divide, creating a brief raw moment of shared humanity. In the biting cold, you found common ground in the universal misery of the war, a fleeting understanding that for a few seconds you were just two men, not enemies, caught in the same brutal hell. The absurdity of official language, too, became a source of quiet cynicism. Military jargon, divisional thrusts, pincer maneuvers, spearhead, Schwerpunkt, felt utterly detached and meaningless when applied to the unrecognizably difficult terrain you were actually navigating. These lofty strategic terms bore little resemblance to the reality of slogging through waist-deep snow, battling frozen equipment, and suffering from constant hunger and fatigue. You recognized the words, but they rang hollow, failing to capture the visceral physical reality of your existence. This stark contrast between the grand abstract language of war and its brutal concrete execution only served to deepen your disillusionment, solidifying the immense gap between the men who planned the war and the men who endured its devastating consequences. It was a constant, subtle reminder that the reality of war was far from the clean lines drawn on a map in a distant Warm Office. Amidst the desperate need for communication and shared gallows, humour-shared rituals and psychological coping mechanisms provided crucial anchors against the overwhelming chaos and unpredictability of war. Routine, however mundane, became a crucial shield. The meticulous cleaning of a rifle, the rhythmic polishing of a dull buckle, or the careful arrangement of meagre possessions, these seemingly insignificant tasks served as vital anchors. They provided a semblance of control and sanity in an environment utterly devoid of either. You observed Hans the youngest in your squad scraping at his invisible stubble with a worn razor like it's a sacred ritual. For him, and for many others, it was not about achieving cleanliness, but about clinging to a fragment of his former self, a routine from the structured, peaceful world he'd left behind. You yourself found solace in cleaning your jamming rifle, slowly, carefully, like it's a ritual that might keep you safe. The focused, repetitive motion, offering a temporary mental reprieve from gnawing anxieties. Superstitions and lucky charms, the ancient companions of soldiers in every war, flourished in this landscape of profound uncertainty. You and your comrades clung to personal talismans, a worn tin coin, an ace of spades carving etched into a piece of wood, a specific wool sock that against all odds had survived every brutal march. These items weren't necessarily objects of genuine belief, but rather served as psychological tools, a desperate means of invoking a sense of protection or fate in an utterly uncontrollable environment. You vividly recalled Hans's unwavering insistence on rubbing his lucky tin coin daily, a silent plea to the universe. Despite your own skepticism in a moment of extreme fear, you found yourself silently asking to touch it, just once. Acknowledging the desperate primal human need for something, anything, to believe in, however small or illogical. Music and memory offered precious, fleeting emotional outlets, gateways to a gentler past. Singing lullabies or familiar tunes, sometimes softly hummed, sometimes sung with ironic detachment, provided brief escapes into happier memories. These sounds offered a connection to home, momentarily overriding the harsh realities of your present. You could hear someone, perhaps a comrade from a distant village, softly singing an off-key lullaby, a melody you recognized from your own childhood. It provided an oddly comforting memory, a brief bitter-sweet dip into a world of warmth and safety. It was a shared moment of quiet longing, a collective sigh from men yearning for something other than war. The act of recording, even in brief fragmented entries in your small mud-stained notebook, served as a crucial form of processing. It was a way to attempt to make sense of the overwhelming experiences, to maintain sanity, and to preserve a sense of self amidst the dehumanizing conditions. Your terse notebook entries, dates, observations, and feelings like, "Everything reminds me of home now," were a quiet rebellion against the erasure of identity that war demanded. Small acts of kindness and sharing, rendered incredibly precious by extreme scarcity, fostered an intense and vital camaraderie. Sharing even a sliver of that rare, captured chocolate bar with your comrades, or offering a sip of pilfered schnapps, provided moments of warmth, both literal against the cold and metaphorical in the human connection. These small gestures counteracted the profound isolation you felt, building bonds of mutual reliance and shared humanity. You remembered offering a cigarette to a young crying soldier, a silent gesture of empathy that transcended words, a simple recognition of shared suffering. Grasping for normalcy, however fleeting, became a vital psychological tool. Even seemingly insignificant acts like sharing an American cigarette or a sip of schnapps became profound moments. They almost feel normal, temporarily tricking you and your comrades into believing this is something other than war, a brief fragile illusion of peace in the very heart of the storm, a desperate human attempt to reclaim a shred of a life that was rapidly disappearing. Amidst the shared rituals and the desperate longing for normalcy, a deeper layer of spiritual frameworks and superstitions provided a quiet, if often unacknowledged, undercurrent to your wartime existence. Formal religion, with its organised services and structured observances, was largely absent in the brutal field conditions. Instead, you observed informal prayer and desperation as a basic human response to overwhelming fear and uncertainty. In the bone-chilling cold of the night, you might hear a comrade barely audibly praise or quietly hums the first line of Stille Nacht. It was a spontaneous turn to spirituality, a personal plea in the darkness for protection or solace, devoid of any formal structure but deeply resonant in its earnestness. There was no chaplain to lead, only individual souls reaching out in their own solitary way. German soldiers, you included, developed a heightened, almost primal awareness of environmental cues, interpreting them as potential omens or warnings. The ancient trees themselves seemed to possess a voice, groaning under the weight of frozen snow like they're bracing for what's coming. The very landscape appeared to hold premonitions influencing morale with its subtle shifts. You couldn't help but notice the sky, for instance, turning bruised purple, and instinctively interpret it as a harbinger of more snow. This detail, more than any tactical report, settled into your gut with a heavy feeling knowing what further snowfall meant for your already arduous journey. This acute sensitivity to nature's mood became a vital, if often subconscious, part of your survival mechanism. The dense ancient forests of the Ardennes were sometimes perceived as sentient, possessing a spirit, the Waldgeist reflecting an almost animistic respect for the powerful, indifferent natural world. The forest felt like an entity that has seen war before, that it remembers contributing to an eerie, almost oppressive atmosphere, a sense of awe and unease that added to your psychological burden. It was a powerful, silent witness that seemed to observe your struggles with an ancient, unwavering indifference. Personal items, even the most mundane, became imbued with a ritualistic significance. That wool sock pouch you carried, for instance, became a kind of relic. You touched it habitually, a small repetitive action. You pretend that somehow it works, despite your logical mind not believing in luck. It offered psychological comfort, a fleeting sense of control through routine, a tiny piece of order in a profoundly disordered world. A stark absence of formal religious observance was one of the striking realities. While individual spiritual coping occurred, there were no church services, no chaplains leading organised prayers, no traditional rituals. This underscored the raw, stripped-down nature of wartime belief, where faith became intensely personal and pragmatic. On Christmas Eve, a time usually rich with spiritual traditions, you experienced no tree, no songs, no fire, just cold breath and tired legs. It was a poignant reflection of the impossibility of traditional observances, a grim reminder that even the most sacred holidays were swallowed by the voracious demands of the war. Yet the longing for that warmth, that sense of peace, was perhaps stronger than ever, a quiet ache beneath the surface. The sight of stars when they pierced through the occasional clear night sky could carry conflicting interpretations, embodying the duality of hope and fear. For Rudy, ever the pragmatic dreamer, they might be seen as good luck, a beautiful distant light offering a speck of hope, a reminder of the vastness beyond your immediate suffering. But for you, or for the more cynical, they were also a chilling reminder we're visible. Clear skies, after all, meant Allied planes could fly, bringing with them the terrifying threat of bombs and strafing runs. So even in moments of cosmic beauty, the immediate brutal realities of war asserted themselves, twisting an ancient source of wonder into a harbinger of renewed danger, a constant reminder of the relentless vulnerability you lived with in the Ardennes, under the vast, indifferent sky. As spiritual frameworks adapted to the brutal realities of the Ardennes, The enduring power of memory and longing for love, marriage and family life became a fragile yet persistent emotional anchor. Memories of home, of family, of loved ones, a mother's lullaby, the faint scent of a sister's lipstick kiss. Cherished photographs served as powerful yet increasingly tenuous links to a world that felt impossibly distant. You carry a small creased note from your sister signed with a lipstick kiss. Barely legible now, its edges softened by damp and constant handling. It is a precious link to affection, a tangible piece of a life that war has savagely interrupted. This memento tucked deep within your uniform is more than just paper. It is a direct line to your former self, a silent conversation with innocence. The thought of home, its warmth, its familiar smells, its comforting routines is a constant, almost painful presence. It's a deep ache often triggered by mundane events, intensifying the longing. That piece of real chocolate captured from an American crate doesn't just taste sweet. It tastes like childhood, instantly transporting you back to Selma's bakery, to the warm, comforting aroma of fresh bread and pastries. Or the sight of stars when they appear reminds you not of omens or air raids, but of your sister's paper stars painstakingly cut out and glued to a homemade Christmas decoration. These small sensory triggers become powerful conduits to a past that feels increasingly like a dream. Yet the sheer intensity of war creates a growing emotional disconnect from your pre-war life. The constant brutal present makes it increasingly hard to conjure vivid memories of warmth and normalcy. You might try to remember your own kitchen, the specific arrangement of pots, the pattern on the tablecloth, but the memory won't come. Only the forest, only the snow, only this silent, forgotten village. The war has carved out such a deep space in your mind that it actively pushes out the softer, gentler memories, replacing them with the harsh, immediate realities of survival. It's a terrifying loss, a slow erosion of your past self. This longing for connection, for the familiar embrace of family, is a universal human experience extending even across enemy lines. You observe an American soldier, a prisoner perhaps, pulling out a worn photograph of his family, his face momentarily softening. Or you hear your comrades in their restless sleep muttering names, wives, children, mothers, a quiet shared testament to the yearning. These moments underscore the profound universality of human connection, an empathy that transcends the artificial boundaries of war, briefly bridging the chasm between adversaries. The shared moment with the American soldier, both of you clutching images of family, one physical, one internal, creates a quiet, wordless understanding, a recognition of shared humanity in the most inhumane of circumstances. Even amidst the brutal realities, fleeting human connections stand out as moments of profound significance. Whether it's with comrades or brief encounters with civilians or enemies, these interactions are etched into your memory. You remember the encounter with a civilian boy, his face smudged with dirt, who points silently toward the German lines, a small interaction of shared vulnerability, a moment of unexpected guidance from someone you are theoretically fighting against. Carrying a worn photo, a tin cross, or that precious note from your sister becomes more than just holding a memento. It represents a desperate clinging to personal identity and the love from home. These are the last vestiges of your true self, the fragile thread connecting you to the world you fight. To return to a world that feels further away with every passing frozen day. As you traverse the raw landscape of the Ardennes, confronting the blend of physical and psychological hardships, the social fabric of unit cohesion, and the shifting sands of identity became ever more crucial, defining your very sense of self amidst the turmoil. Despite the profound individual struggles, the bone-deep cold, the gnawing hunger, the constant suffocating fear, a deep unspoken bond formed between you and your German comrades. This camaraderie was not born from shared ideology or grand national narratives. but from the brutal necessity of mutual reliance for sheer survival, forged in the crucible of shared suffering. Your platoon, a microcosm of the larger army, was a mix of grim veterans and trembling newcomers, and within this harsh environment, empathy became a survival instinct. No one called Hans out for his pathetic fake shaving ritual. Instead, such quiet acts of shared understanding strengthened the bond. You simply shared the burdens, pushing a stuck truck together in silent collective effort, a bond deeper than words cemented by the desperate reality of your intertwined fate. However, beneath this surface of camaraderie, internal social divisions persisted, particularly the significant weight of unit reputation. The differing reputations and brutal methods of units like the SS versus the regular Wehrmacht created undeniable internal friction impacting trust and self-perception within the broader military identity. You felt a visceral discomfort with the SS, a distinct sense of being separate and in some ways morally superior. This sentiment manifested in those quiet internal jokes you shared, and it was implicitly acknowledged by the officer's specific order against SS nonsense after Malmedy highlighting a deep cultural schism within the German forces. You were Wehrmacht, a regular soldier, and that distinction, however subtle to an outsider, meant everything to your sense of honour and your very identity. The generational impact of actions, particularly events like the Malmedy massacre, cast a long, dark shadow over all German soldiers irrespective of their direct involvement. Even though the atrocity was committed by the SSS, the rumours and confirmations shaped enemy perceptions and hardened their resistance, impacting even those far removed from the event. You vividly recall the chilling realisation that now the snow feels tainted, after hearing of the massacre, the pristine white landscape now carrying the stain of inhumanity. The fear you observed in the American prisoner you understood was not directed at you personally, but at something else, the terrifying spectre of the SS. This collective burden of guilt, however unjust, coloured your interactions with the enemy, and made your own survival even more precarious. You were no longer just a soldier. You were a German soldier carrying the weight of a horrific deed. You did not commit a silent indictment against your very uniform. The military system inherently suppressed individual identity, subsuming it in favour of the unit's survival and mission. Your personal aspirations, your unique quirks, were all pushed aside by the collective need. Individual actions or inactions profoundly impacted the entire group. The chilling silence that fell when a comrade went missing wasn't just grief. It was a collective understanding of loss and the brutal necessity to move on to prioritise the survival of the remaining unit. You remembered your quick, almost reflexive action to pull a tripped rifleman up without a word of thanks exchanged. It wasn't about politeness. It was an instinct of unit preservation, a seamless, wordless cooperation born of brutal necessity. As the offensive stalled and retreat became an inevitable, unspoken reality, the collective identity of a victorious army began to unravel. It was replaced by a quiet individual resignation to failure, profound sense of disillusionment for you, the German soldier. You saw Schaefer's rifle with December 16th, the start of the offensive carved into its stock, but nothing since. It symbolised a frozen moment of initial hope, now a relic of a failed past, a testament to an ambition that shattered in the Ardennes snow. This erosion of a shared, triumphant identity left you feeling adrift, your purpose unclear. Yet even in this unravelling, the quiet search for lost comrades like the desperate hunt for Kruger highlighted the enduring internal bonds of the unit. These small acts of loyalty, even in the face of inevitable retreat, underscored the devastating impact of even small losses on morale and cohesion among German soldiers, a desperate clinging to human connection amidst the cold, hard facts of defeat. As you navigated this complex tapestry of daily hardship, systemic failure, and internal emotional worlds, the Battle of the Bulge became not just a historical event, but a deeply personal testament to endurance, disillusionment, and the quiet, inevitable unravelling of purpose. You've experienced the cold that seeped into your bones, the hunger that gnawed at your gut, the constant threat that reshaped your understanding of life and death. You have seen how grand strategies dissolved into the immediate brutal realities of the front, how the highest commands fractured into desperate improvisation, and how the relentless fury of nature became an adversary as formidable as any enemy soldier. Through it all, your individual will to survive your shared moments of camaraderie and your quiet internal reflections formed the fragile human core of an experience that defied easy categorization. It was a time when the external pressures of war stripped away all but the most essential aspects of existence, leaving behind an unvarnished portrait of human resilience and the profound cost of ambition. As the echoes of the Ardennes fade and the frost on your historical uniform slowly melts away, allow your mind to gently detach from the chilling landscapes and the profound human struggles we've explored tonight. You've walked in the snow-dusted boots of a German soldier, felt the gnawing cold, the pangs of hunger, and the quiet despair of a grand offensive unravelling into personal misery. You've experienced the simple acts of survival, the quiet camaraderie, and the subtle shifts in spirit that define an existence at the very edge of human endurance. It was a world where every breath was a battle, every step a challenge, and the future a vast, uncertain blank. But now, as the past settles back into the quiet pages of history, allow yourself to return to the warmth and comfort of your own space. Feel the soft blankets, the gentle hum of your surroundings, the simple luxury of knowing where your next meal will come from, and the profound peace of an unbroken night's sleep. The hardships of that distant winter are just memories, echoes in the vast library of history, and you are safely here in the present, enveloped by peace. Let those vivid images of the frozen Ardennes, of shared silence and subtle acts of defiance of the profound weight of an unjustified war gently drift into the quiet recesses of your mind. There they can rest, transformed from harsh reality into a soft, murmuring whisper. As the historical whispers settle, let your own thoughts grow soft and hazy, your breathing deepen, and your mind prepare for a restorative, dreamless sleep.